Unfold a European map from the year 1570, and your eye drifts east, past Poland, past the Volga River, into a region that swallows the entire top half of Asia. Across it, in bold Latin lettering, stretches a single word, Tartaria. It runs from the Caspian Sea to the Pacific, from the frozen coast of Siberia down toward the deserts of Central Asia. In area, it dwarfs Europe several times over. And yet, to the men who drew it, almost all of it was guesswork. Consider the scale. This one label covered more than 11 million square miles, an expanse crossed by the Ob, the Yenisei, and the Lena rivers, home to hundreds of distinct peoples speaking dozens of unrelated languages. There were walled cities, nomadic confederations, Buddhist monasteries, and Muslim trading towns. But a mapmaker in Antwerp or Venice knew none of this in detail. He knew a name, and he knew the land was vast, and so he wrote the name across the vastness. That is the strange power of Tartary. It was never a kingdom. No ruler ever sat on a Tartarian throne. No ambassador ever carried Tartarian credentials. There was no capital, no treasury, no army marching under a Tartarian flag. The word described a hole in European knowledge, and the hole was continent-sized. Where facts ran out, the label began. Today, those old maps confuse us precisely because they look so confident. The engraving is precise. The coastlines are inked with authority. The place names march in orderly rows. Everything about the presentation says, "This is known." But the confidence was a performance. Behind the elegant cartography lay travelers, rumors, second-hand legends, and long stretches of pure imagination dressed up as geography. To understand these maps, we have to understand a single question that governed everything printed on them. Why would educated men label a territory they had never seen, using a word whose meaning they could not fully explain? The answer begins not with geography at all, but with language, and with a terrifying confusion between a living people and the ancient pit of the dead. The word starts with a people who genuinely existed, the Tatars. They were Turkic-speaking tribes living on the steppe near the Mongol heartland, and by the 12th century their name was known among their neighbors along the caravan routes. When the armies of the East came crashing westward, Europeans heard this name spoken by the invaders and their allies, and they seized upon it. But something happened to the word as it traveled into Latin. Educated clergymen who read the classics knew another, older term that sounded almost identical, Tartarus. In Greek mythology, Tartarus was the deepest abyss of the underworld, a pit below Hades where the wicked were punished and the titans were chained. To a frightened monk in the 1240s, the resemblance felt like a warning from God. These horsemen, he reasoned, had ridden out of Tartarus itself. The French king Louis IX made the pun explicit, and it stuck. So the tribal name Tatar acquired an extra letter and became Tartar, fused forever with the idea of hell. This single spelling change did enormous work. It stopped being merely a description of a people and became a moral judgment, a shorthand for demons on horseback pouring from the eastern dark. And because Europeans could not distinguish one steppe nation from another, the word spread outward to cover everyone who lived beyond the known frontier. Kazakhs, Mongols, Manchus, Uzbeks, the fur-trapping peoples of the taiga, all of them from a Latin scribe's desk became Tartars. The name behaved like spilled ink. It began as a small mark for specific tribes, then bled across the whole map until it stained every land Europe could not name precisely. Tartary was born as a linguistic accident, welded to a theological fear, and once written down, it became self-perpetuating. Each new map copied the last, and the word grew larger with every printing. But an accident of spelling alone could not have burned this label so deeply into the European mind. For that, the continent needed a genuine catastrophe, an invasion so violent that its memory outlived the empire that caused it. In the spring of 1223, near the Kalka River, an allied army of Rus princes met a force they did not understand and were annihilated. The riders had come from thousands of miles away, moving faster than any news could travel. Their commander answered to a man the world would call Genghis Khan, who by his death in 1227 had forged the largest contiguous land empire in human history. His successors did not slow down. In 1237, Batu Khan swept into the Russian principalities. By 1240, Kiev, the great mother city of the Rus, lay in ruins. In 1241, at Legnica in Poland and Mohi in Hungary, Mongol tactics destroyed the assembled knights of Central Europe within days. Reports reaching the West spoke of cities emptied, of populations counted in the hundreds of thousands slaughtered, of an enemy that appeared without warning and vanished the same way. To Christendom, it looked like the end of the world. Chroniclers reached for scripture. The word Tartar, already fused with the underworld, now had blood to justify it. These were, the clergy insisted, the horsemen of the apocalypse, and the pit of Tartarus had opened. Then, almost as suddenly, the pressure eased. The great westward campaign halted in 1242 when the Mongols turned back to elect a new leader. Over the following century, the empire fragmented into rival khanates, and by the 1300s, the terror that had frozen Europe receded into memory. But the name did not recede. This is the crucial turn. The living empire that gave the word its horror dissolved, splintering into the Golden Horde, the Chagatai lands, and successor states that fought one another. Yet on European maps, the label survived intact, detached now from any single ruler or state. Tartary became a ghost, the outline of a fear that had outlasted its cause. Mapmakers kept writing it across Asia long after there was any Mongol emperor to fear. The word had become a monument to a trauma, and where a monument stands, curiosity follows. Soon Europeans would want to see this land of terror for themselves, and a handful of brave, credulous travelers would go looking. In 1253, a Flemish friar named William of Rubruck set out on a journey of roughly 5,000 miles, carrying a letter from King Louis IX to the Mongol court. He reached Karakorum, the imperial capital, and left a report of startling honesty. He described a silver drinking fountain shaped like a tree, dispensing wine and fermented mare's milk. He noted the mix of Nestorian Christians, Muslims, and Buddhists living side by side. When he found no monstrous races, he simply said so, contradicting the legends his readers expected. Rubruck was an eyewitness, and it shows. A generation later came the most famous traveler of all. Marco Polo, a Venetian merchant, claimed to have spent 17 years in the service of Kublai Khan, and his account, dictated around 1298, became a bestseller of the medieval world. He described the wealth of Cathay, the burning black stones the Chinese used for fuel, coal, unknown in Europe, and paper money backed by an emperor's seal. Much of what he reported was real, confirmed centuries later. But here the trouble begins. Readers could not separate the verified from the invented, and Polo himself repeated hearsay. Islands of men with dogs, heads, kingdoms of pure gold, birds large enough to carry elephants. The problem was not lying. The problem was that a single manuscript blended careful observation with campfire rumor, and Europe had no way to tell which was which. A returning traveler was one voice against 1,000 miles of ignorance, so the fantasies filled the gaps. When facts were thin, imagination flowed in to complete the picture. The mythical Christian king Prester John, said to rule somewhere in the east. Races of monsters inherited from ancient authors, cities of impossible splendor. Each new account was copied, embellished, and mixed with older legends until the line between report and fable dissolved entirely. This was the raw material handed to the mapmakers. Not a survey, not measurements, but a jumble of merchants, notes, and monsters, tales. The question was what a professional cartographer, armed with compasses and copper plates, would actually do with such contradictory scraps. In 1570, the Antwerp scholar Abraham Ortelius published the Theatrum Orbis Terrarum, widely called the first modern atlas. It was a triumph of the printer's art. Its plates engraved with beautiful precision. Turn to the sheet marked Tartaria, and the illusion holds for a moment. Rivers, mountains, a scatter of cities in confident lettering. Then you notice that the interior is largely invention. Ortelius placed the fabled city of Kambalu, Polo's version of Beijing, alongside a legendary tent city where the Great Khan supposedly camped, drawn as a golden pavilion in the middle of empty steppe. His rival and sometime collaborator Gerardus Mercator did the same. On Mercator's charts, the coast of northeastern Asia bends according to guesswork, and toponyms migrate from one edition to the next, as though the geography itself were unstable. This was standard practice. A cartographer worked from the scraps we have described, a traveler's distance estimate, a classical author's phrase, a merchant's half-remembered route. From these he built a coherent-looking image, because a coherent image was what buyers paid for. Blank paper was commercially unacceptable. An empty quarter of the map looked like failure, an admission of ignorance no publisher wanted to print, so the space demanded filling. Where knowledge failed, decoration answered. Engravers populated the margins with elephants, with camel caravans, with monstrous figures inherited from ancient texts. Cartouches sprouted with heraldic beasts. The famous phrase, "Here be monsters," captures the instinct exactly. Unknown territory could not be left mute, so it was given creatures and a caption. The decoration served a double purpose. It sold the map, and it disguised the hole at its center. Crucially, the confidence of the engraving concealed the poverty of the evidence. A reader in Amsterdam had no way to know that the elegant city symbol he was looking at rested on a single sentence from Marco Polo, itself perhaps a rumor. The map looked authoritative because that was its job. Beneath the ornament, Tartary remained exactly what it had always been, a name laid across land Europe had never measured. But that land was not empty. It teemed with real nations, and it is time to meet the peoples, the single word erased. Strip away the single word, and the true map explodes into color. What Europeans flattened into one brown expanse held dozens of distinct peoples, languages, and states. In the western steppe rode the Kazakhs, organized into three hordes, the Great, Middle, and Lesser, each with its own Khan and grazing lands, stretching from the Caspian to the Altai. To their south lay the settled Uzbek Khanates of Bukhara, Khiva, and Kolkand, cities with mosques, madrasas, and libraries older than many European universities. Bukhara alone housed thousands of students of theology and mathematics, while mapmakers in Antwerp drew its region as vacant grass. Eastward stood the Manchus, who in 1644 seized Beijing and founded the Qing dynasty, ruling a fifth of humanity. Europeans still filed them under Tartary. Northward across Siberia spread the Yakuts, Buryats, Evanks, and Chukchi reindeer herders, hunters, and fishers, whose homelands covered 5,000 miles of taiga and tundra. The Tibetans held their plateau under the Dalai Lamas. The Kalmyks migrated west toward the Volga in the 1600s. None of these called themselves Tartars. None shared one ruler, one faith, or one tongue. They spoke Turkic, Mongolic, Tungusic, and Tibeto-Burman languages, separated by thousands of miles and centuries of rivalry. Kazakh nomads and Bukharan merchants had less in common than a Spaniard and a Swede. Yet the European eye, unable to distinguish them, folded all into a single label of convenience. Tartary was never a nation, never an empire, never a government that levied a tax or signed a treaty. It was a confession, an admission that the West did not know who lived there. The word measured not the land, but the limits of European knowledge. Where information ran out, one name filled the void, erasing Kazakh, Uzbek, Manchu, and Yakut alike beneath a foreign fiction. This ignorance could not survive contact forever. As the 17th century turned, two hungry empires began pushing into these steppes and forests, armies and surveyors advancing together. They came not to imagine Tartary, but to conquer it, count it, and finally put it on paper. And their maps would leave the myths no place to hide. The end of Tartary began not with scholars, but with soldiers. From the west came Russia, driving eastward across Siberia with astonishing speed. Cossack bands crossed the Ural Mountains in the 1580s, and within 60 years reached the Pacific. In 1639, Ivan Moskvitin stood on the Sea of Okhotsk, an ocean earlier maps had barely imagined. Fortified towns rose in their wake. Tobolsk in 1587, Yakutsk in 1632, Okhotsk in 1647. Each fort became a customs post, collecting a fur tribute called yasak, and each demanded to know exactly who lived where. From the east pressed the Qing, the Manchu dynasty now ruling China. Under the Kangxi Emperor, Qing armies pushed into Mongolia and the Tarim Basin, absorbing khanates that European maps had left as guesswork. The two empires collided along the Amur River and in 1689 signed the Treaty of Nerchinsk, the first agreement between Russia and China, drawn up with Jesuit interpreters and fixing a real negotiated border across land once labeled only Tartary. Then came the surveyors. Kangxi commissioned Jesuit cartographers to map his entire realm. Between 1708 and 1717, they measured coordinates by astronomical observation, producing the Kangxi Atlas, the most accurate chart of East Asia yet made. Russia answered in kind. Peter the Great dispatched expeditions, and Vitus Bering sailed north in the 1720s and 1740s, charting the strait that now bears his name. Latitude and longitude replaced legend. Where mapmakers once sketched monsters, teams now recorded rivers, mountain passes, and the names peoples called themselves. The Kazakh hordes, the Buryats, the oases of the Tarim, each acquired coordinates, populations, and documented allegiances. Slowly the blank expanse filled with fact. Every fort, treaty, and survey chipped away at the fiction. Tartary had thrived on distance and darkness. Now empires stood inside it, counting heads and drawing lines. The land had not changed, but knowledge had. And once a place is measured, named correctly, and bounded by treaty, the old catch-all word loses its purpose. Through the 18th and 19th centuries, that reckoning would reach the mapmakers themselves, and one by one, they would begin erasing the name entirely. The deletion happened quietly, page by page, decade by decade. Through the 18th century, as Jesuit surveys and Russian expeditions flooded Europe with real data, cartographers faced an uncomfortable choice: keep a word they could no longer justify, or replace it with the truth. Truth 1. Compare the atlases. In 1700, maps still labeled the region Grand Tartary in bold letters. By the 1780s, French cartographer Jean-Baptiste Bourguignon d'Anville, working from the Kangxi surveys, was drawing Chinese Tartary and independent Tartary as shrinking zones, hemmed by properly named provinces. By 1800, the term survived mainly as a fading gloss, printed smaller each edition. The 19th century finished the job. Precise names took hold: Turkestan, Mongolia, Manchuria, Siberia, Kazakh steppe. The great game between Britain and Russia sent explorers, spies, and surveyors deep into Central Asia, mapping every pass from the Pamirs to the Hindu Kush. There was no room left for vagueness when armies planned campaigns on these charts. Scientific geography demanded specifics. Elevations, river courses, ethnographic detail, and Tartary offered none. It became, plainly, an embarrassment. To keep writing it was to confess you had not read the latest expedition reports. Encyclopedias began adding cautious notes explaining the word as obsolete, a relic of older ignorance. The 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica dismissed Tartary as a term that had long ceased to have any definite meaning. By the early 20th century, no serious atlas printed it as a country. The word survived only in poetry, in old library shelves, and in the yellowed maps collectors prized precisely for their errors. What had once covered an area larger than Europe now covered nothing at all. Its disappearance was not a loss of land but a gain of knowledge. The moment Western maps finally caught up with the peoples who had always lived there. And that should have been the end. A false word, correctly retired, replaced by accurate names for real nations. Yet, a strange thing happened in our own century. Those beautiful, mistaken old maps resurfaced online, and a new generation, mistaking error for evidence, began insisting Tartary had been real all along. The myth, thought buried, was about to rise again. In the age of the internet, the ghost returned. Scroll through certain corners of social media and you will find millions of views devoted to Tartaria. Not the cartographer's error, but a supposed hidden empire, advanced and global, allegedly erased from history by a grand conspiracy. Believers point to old maps bearing the word as proof. They gather photos of grand 19th century buildings, the Chicago World's Fair of 1893, ornate train stations, domed exhibition halls, and claim these were relics of a lost Tartarian civilization, its history stolen and its achievements reassigned. The theory grew loud around 2016 and spread through video platforms ever since, but every pillar of the myth collapses under evidence. The Chicago Fair's White City was documented in thousands of photographs, blueprints, and payrolls, built of plaster and staff over temporary frames, then demolished on schedule. The grand buildings had architects with names, contracts, and dates. The maps that seem to prove a Tartarian empire are the very ones this film has traced. European guesswork, admissions of ignorance, not records of a hidden state. The theory mistakes a label for a nation, a blank space for a secret. It ignores the Kazakhs and Uzbeks, the Manchus and Yakuts, the Bukharan scholars and Siberian herders who actually lived in these lands. Real people with real histories, now buried a second time beneath a fantasy. That is the cruel irony. The Tartaria myth erases the same peoples, the original word erased, replacing living cultures with an invented empire that never breathed. The truth is richer than any conspiracy. It is the story of dozens of nations misread by outsiders, of surveyors and treaties, of a word that measured the edge of European knowledge until knowledge finally caught up and let it go. There was no vanished superstate. There was no hidden race of builders. There was only a name draped across a place the mapmakers could not yet see. Remember that? The next time an old chart tempts you with mystery. The land was always real. The peoples were always there. The empire was never anything but a gap in understanding. Tartary was ignorance, not a country.